today we are going to see, that is the namespace. Namespace, so that this namespace we have already used in our programs. Okay, so we are using a namespace standard in our code everywhere. So why we are using? Because that standard contains the, it defines the cout, indel, scene, these different functions in those std namespaces. So what exactly the meaning of namespace and how to create those namespace, how to use any created namespace, that we are going to study under this particular topic. So this allows us to group the named entities that otherwise would have a global scope into the narrower scope, giving them namespace scope. So means here what we are doing, we are grouping the similar entities under one group. Okay, so where we are allowing them the local scope instead of a global scope. So this allows organizing the elements of the programs into different logical scope referred to by the names. So it is a feature added in C++ and not present in C. This is newly added in a C++. We have not seen any kind of the namespaces in case of the C. So it is a declarative region that provides a scope to the identifiers. So those identifiers means it can be a data type, it can be a function, it can be a variable that we are defining inside that particular namespace. So what we are doing, suppose I have a one variable or I have a one function like void add, and I want to give some scope to them. Scope means the area within which it will be alive. Okay, so what we are doing, we are defining that inside one namespace, and you can use that particular namespace. Okay, similarly the condition arises where you are writing a code or writing a function whose name is similar to any of the function present in the another library. So in that case, in order to distinguish your own function from that particular different library, you can also add them in the namespaces. So using that namespace name and the scope resolution operator, you can avoid the confusion between the two functions having the same names. So this multiple namespace blocks with the same name are allowed. Multiple namespace with the same name. All the declarations within those blocks are declared in the name scope. Like we will see with the help of one example how these namespaces are written. So specifically, what are the rules of creating related to these namespaces? This declarations appears only at the global scope. Okay, only at a global scope means similar to your classes. You write a definition of a class globally. You can write a similar, you can declare the namespaces similarly. We always write using namespace standard after your header file. Okay, so namespace declarations can be nested within another namespace also. So declarations can be nested within another namespace. So you can write a namespace within another namespace. That is the nesting of those namespaces. So these declarations don't have an access specifier. Similar to your constructors, we don't use the constructors. Constructors will have any access specifier, so those will be always defined under the public section only. Here namespaces will not have any kind of the access specifier, either public or the private. Similar to your classes, in case of the class you need to define those variables or the data members or member functions under the different sections. But in case of the namespaces, there will be no any such a sections present there. Okay, no need to give the semicolon after the closing braces of the definition of a namespace. Similar to your class, after at the end of the class we write the closing curly bracket, and then there will be a semicolon, so that indicates the end of the class. But here in case of the namespace, there will be no any semicolon. We can split the definition of namespaces over several units. So we can divide your namespace in a different units, like of some functions, some declarations of the variables, etc. They can we can create the classes in the namespaces too. In this namespace, you can write a class. and then you can use that class with the specific names of that namespace. We can extend the namespaces. We can extend the namespaces like your inheritance. We can use the inheritance in case of the namespaces too. We can define the methods outside this namespaces. Method means nothing but a function. Okay, so you can define the method which are declared in the namespaces outside the namespace. Okay, nesting or aliasing is also possible. Nesting means namespace within a namespace. Aliasing means giving another name or the similar name to that particular namespaces. Now let's see an example how what we are doing here. First line, it is our header file. Now what we are doing here using is the keyword or the directive, preprocessor directive we are using. Uh, what what is the use of this? We are using this standard namespace in our code. Okay, in our code. So whatever defined inside of this standard, that you can access as it is without giving it scope. Now, in next line, what we have written, namespace first. Okay, namespace first. So this is your keyword and this is the name of your namespace. Now, what we are doing, whatever the standard here mentioned, this standard namespace, it is the built-in namespace. Okay, it is a built-in namespace. And whatever the first namespace we are writing here, it is the user defined. We are giving the definition or we are creating a new namespace. Okay, so what we are doing in this particular namespace, similar to your class definition, here the keyword namespace is there. We are giving the name for this namespace. So this first, it is the user defined name or the identifier we have given here. And in curly brackets, what we are doing, in my namespace, there is only one variable is there, which is the int val, and whose value is the 500. Whose value is the 500. Fine. So what we have done here, this is the definition of our namespace created. Fine. Next is the int val equals to 100. So what is this? This is the value variable we are declaring globally. Okay, so the scope of this val variable is the global. Scope of this val is only up to this namespace first. Okay, now what we are doing, we are writing the main function int main. Fine, int main. Again, we are declaring the int val equals to 200. So what is the meaning of this? Now whatever the val equals to 200, this is your local variable. Fine. So the scope of this val variable is up to this main function only. So here what we have done, we have defined a 3 variables having the same name. Having the same name, one which is a local defined inside a class, inside a main function, one which is a global that is defined outside a main, and one is present in the namespace first. Okay, whose scope is up to that particular namespace only. And in cout statement, what we are doing, cout first colon double scope resolution operator and val. So what we are doing here, we are printing the value of that val variable. So which value must get printed here? Which value must get printed here? Now to this value variable, this belongs to, we have attached the namespace. Okay, so that value variable from first namespace, and that is having a 500, and that 500 value will get printed on your output console. Okay, so in this case, if you just write a val, then it will print your local variable name. Fine. So in order to distinguish between these different variables having the same name defined at a different places, you can make a use of the namespaces, which gives a specific scope to that particular variable. Okay, so now here we have created a namespace and we are using the variable inside that namespace using this name and the scope resolution operator. Similarly, we know that this cout belongs to the standard. cout belongs to the standard. So if you don't mention the namespace name, then you need to write std scope resolution operator and the cout. Std scope resolution operator cout less than, and whatever the statement you want to write, that you can mention here. Similarly, scene also belongs to this std namespace, so you need to write std and colon ce. Fine, so it defines the scope for that particular variable. But here instead of writing std scope resolution at all the times, what we are doing, we are avoiding doing this by simply writing a one line here. Okay, so we are adding that particular namespace standard in our code using this particular keyword using directive. Okay, so this is an example. One more example you can check. Again, we have written a namespace ns1. Here one value is there, here one function is there, int value. So this is the function we are defining inside the namespace, okay, which is just returning a some value 5. We are writing another namespace whose name is the ns2. Now here we have defining one constant variable x. Constant and variable both are different. Constant x, which is 100, then double value, this is the function, and it returning a value simply the multiplied by 2. Okay, now two namespaces we have defined here separately. Okay, we have defined here separately. Now we are making use of these two namespaces in our code. Main function is written in cout ns1 scope resolution operator and value. So you can check the value function is there in ns1 namespace as well as the ns2 namespace, but the only name is similar. Fine. The written value of this in first function is the integer, and second function is the double. So whenever you call the function, at that time we all actually don't come to know what will be the return type. Fine, it is decided at a compile time only which function will be executed. So if you just write a value, so it will create ambiguity that which function will get executed, as both are having no any parameter. Okay, so with the help of a namespace, what we are telling that this value belongs to the ns1 and it is called in this cout statement. So whatever the value returned by this value function, that will be printed on your output console. So here the value function of ns1, which is returning a 5, and this will output a 5 value on your output console. In the second cout statement, we are writing ns2 double colon and value. So here the value function that will be called, it belongs to the double value, which is of a ns2. So here it will return a 200 value on your output console. Fine. Now next in cout ns2 colon scope resolution operator x. So we are printing the value of the variable, value of the constant which belongs to ns2 namespace. So here it will display the 100. So these are the outputs of your 3 cout statement, where we have called the two different functions which belongs to the two different namespaces using this particular name and the scope resolution operator. Fine. Suppose if similar to this using namespace standard, if I write before this main function the line like using, okay, if I'm adding the line using here only namespace, using namespace instead of standard, what I am writing ns1. If I am writing ns1 and the semicolon, so what will happen? So whatever the functions, whatever the declarations there in the ns1, that you can use as it is without mentioning their name. So instead of this value, there is no any need to write ns1 and scope resolution operator. You can simply specify the value. So this value will be considered from the ns1. because we are importing all the declarations inside that ns1 using this using directive. Okay, that's why we are, as we are writing this line, so there is no any need to attach the standard at the cout statements. Okay, we are directly writing the cout single word only. If you don't specify this line, then you need to attach the standard and scope resolution operator to all the cout c in endl statements. Okay, so in this way you can create a namespace where you can define all the values, and you can use those namespace by with the help of a using keyword. Okay, so the using namespace standard that we have already seen, it means we use the namespace named std. It is an abbreviation for your standard namespace. We use all the things with the std namespace. If we don't want to use this line of a code, we use the things in the namespace like std scope resolution cout, std scope resolution end. But in order to avoid such a writing at all the places where cout or endl or scene is there, what we are doing, we are importing or we are writing this line explicitly, so that it will remove, it will there is no need to write these std scope resolution at all the places. Okay, one more example is there where what we are doing, we are using a class inside a namespace. We are using a class inside a namespace. In previous examples, what we have seen how to declare a variable, how to initialize a variable, how to write a function inside a namespace. Okay, so similarly, you can also write a class inside a namespace too. Okay, how it is, see, namespace ns is the name. Okay, now inside this namespace we are declaring one class, defining one class geek. Okay, curly bracket under public section we are writing one member function display, where we are simply displaying printing one line ns scope resolution geek scope resolution display function. Now what is this? Is it the function call statement? Whatever the line we are writing under this cout, ns scope resolution geek scope resolution display and the parentheses are there, so you can find that this is a kind of the function call statement, right? But this is not a function call, as there is a double quotes, right? You can find a double quotes. So if there is a double, anything written in the double quotes of cout, it means that that particular statement will get printed as it is on your output console. Okay, and if you don't mention the double quotes, then that will print the value of that particular variable, or if it is a function, then it will return the value after the execution of that particular function. But here simply it is displaying the nsgeek display on your output console. Now this is your end of the function, this is your end of the class. As we know that the class always ends with a semicolon. Fine, so that's why semicolon is mentioned here, and the third curly bracket, it is your end of the namespace. So we have written one class which is name having a name geek, and which defines a one display member function inside this namespace. Okay, now what we want to do, we want to use this particular class which belongs to the namespace ns. Okay, which belongs to the namespace ns. So that for that what you can do, we are writing a main function. As we know that all the functions, all the execution starts always from the main. Fine, now what we want to do, suppose I want to display this particular I want to call this display function which is printing some line your output console. Okay, as this function belongs to the class, so what we need to do, we need to create an object of that class. Okay, and how to create object of the class? Simply with the help of the name of the class and name of the object. So here geek is the name of the class and obj is the name of the object of that geek class. But in addition to that, you can also find here ns and double quote, ns and the scope resolution operator. Why is it so? Just because this geek class is present inside the namespace ns. Okay, so in order to give it scope, we need to add that ns and scope resolution operator before the class geek. Okay, so here we have created an object and simply obj.display. Obj.display will invoke the display function present in the class geek, and this will output this particular line on your output console. Okay, so this is the way with which you can write down a class inside a namespace. Also you can use that particular class for creation of object. So wherever you will use the name of the class, at before it you have to attach this ns scope resolution geek. Okay, and if you don't want to mention this, then what we need to do, you need to write this line using namespace. What is the name of the namespace? That is the ns. Okay, using namespace ns. If you insert this particular line, then there is no any need to write this particular. You can simply write geek obj like your normal class declaration or normal object declaration. Okay, so this is the simple example of using the namespace, that is the built-in namespace that we already know, which is a standard, and how to create a user-defined namespaces.